welcome to another episode of History Now, the Future, the show where we take a sharp look at some of the most pressing issues of today, using history as our guide and the future as our destination. My name is Cory Bradford, and today my guest is the founder and executive director of the Bloc, which is a sports-based education nonprofit that uses the power of boxing to provide academic and social resources to Chicago's youth. He also uses the power of social media to talk more about his nonprofit and its goals for his community, but also to talk more about his own philosophy on how we should be providing more help to our youth, particularly the youth in at-risk communities. And lately, he's been doing a lot of videos on social media talking about how to parent a rambunctious toddler, which, as a father of a rambunctious toddler myself, I am very interested in having that conversation. Please welcome him to the show. I've been a fan of his content for a long time. Jamyle Cannon, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, I'm pumped to be here. The fanhood is mutual. You absolutely nailed the introduction. So I'm excited for the conversation we got coming.
Yes, thank you so much. So first things first, I just want to talk a little bit about you specifically. Are you from Chicago originally?
So I'm from Lexington, Kentucky. I
Okay.
grew up there. Yeah, went to college at the University of Kentucky. I had this really interesting experience as a young person where I moved from this poor neighborhood surrounded with affluence to a poor neighborhood in a poor community. And I watched the quality of education just drop off of a cliff. I remember going from spelling words like phenomenal and unique to spelling words like together and because in this new school, and just feeling like something profoundly unfair was happening. And I couldn't put my finger on it. So when I learned about education and inequality, I decided to join Teach for America, moved out to Phoenix, Arizona. I then moved to the west side of Chicago because I knew that there were some tough battles being fought here, and helped start a school out on the west side.
Awesome. Well, that's very commendable to even take on that type of responsibility. And what made you? I mean, it sounds like you had this experience with education very early, where you saw the decline in neighborhoods based off of class and their access to certain resources. So when you were involved with Teach for America and you ended up in Chicago, what was some of your first impressions just in that particular area, and just some of the things that you saw immediately right off the bat that needed changing?
I felt like I had been lied to about Chicago. I felt like I've been told that young people just wanted to run wild and didn't want what was best for them. People came to me with this hopeless narrative about the west and the south sides of Chicago. And I got here and I started meeting kids, and I was blown away by how talented they were, by how driven they were. You could have one or two explanations for what's going on here. Either young people on Chicago's west side are less talented, less intelligent, less driven than everybody else, or something profoundly unfair is happening. They don't have the resources and opportunities that all kids need. And that feeling, the idea that people look at these kids and they think they're less than, I think that it still hits me to this day that we need to educate people on how wonderful these young people are.
Absolutely. It's interesting that there's so many similarities between our experience and I have relatives in Chicago. I first went to Chicago as a political organizer. Actually, I did some political organizing work there. Actually, not too far from the West Side, most of the neighborhood of Austin,
Yeah.
that particular area. And so when I was there, the same thing. I had all these narratives about Chicago, and then when I met the people, I mean, it was just some of the most warm, welcoming people. And I did work with a lot of young people too, because we were doing canvassing efforts in that particular area. And I did work with a lot of young people as well. And like you said, there's so many false narratives about Chicago being spread. It's usually these kind of nefarious political and ideological narratives that really don't match what's really going on there. I thought Chicago was a beautiful city. I had a lot of fun there, but I also learned a lot about just life there. I feel like Chicago is probably one of the best cities to learn about like what America really is, because there's so much going on there. There's so much variety, but also too, when you go to from the north side to the south side, you can clearly see that class disparity and just
Mhm.
how it affects people and just everything like that. So yeah, I learned a lot about Chicago just from that little experience, being there for like 4 or 5 months.
And you think about, who does that narrative serve? Who's being served and who's being disserved, and who is allowed to sleep better at night because they believe the people over here are just less worthy than they are on their side. If we really take a look and we say that all young people deserve to have an opportunity to succeed, all people are full of dignity and worth, we have to start acting like that. But if we don't view the world through that lens, then you know what? We can throw them in jail. We can leave them in substandard quality housing. We can take the resources out of their community and use them for our good because they're not as worthy as we are. And I think a lot of people are served by that narrative and comforted by it. And it's time to disrupt it.
Absolutely. And it sounds like that's what you're doing with your nonprofit, The Block. So talk to me a little bit about how I mean, I've seen one of your videos where you kind of talked about, originally you were starting a basketball program and then that didn't work out as much. So tell me a little bit about how The Block came to be and just how you decided to use boxing to, teach these children the lessons that you feel like they weren't really getting anywhere else.
Well, boxing really changed my life. I had always been good in school, but outside of school, especially as a young kid, I was kind of a hammer looking for a nail. And boxing really gave me some guidelines to work within and help me work through some of the anger that I was feeling, and was supportive in my growth as an individual. If you go up to a kid on the west side of Chicago who's faced X, Y, and Z traumas, you say, "Hey, do you want to join this mentoring program with me?" The answer is probably going to be no. It doesn't sound interesting. It's not fun. But if you say, "Will you join this boxing club with me?" they're much more likely to say yes. And then you get to build this relationship around something that for them is culturally affirming. For our young boys, affirming of their masculinity. For a lot of our girls, a place where they're building confidence and feeling secure in themselves. And because you have that authentic relationship based in something real, you can then provide other resources and opportunities around that. So I was a national champion boxer back in 2009. I tore my rotator cuff in a national championship fight, which ultimately led me into the classroom. I have a bachelor's in social work, a master's in education, and I just get to jam all these things together to run the block and work with young people. To me, it just made sense. It was what was useful for me. It's what kids were asking for. So we just started a boxing club in my classroom, pushed the tables and chairs out of the way, and had some great lessons, and it just grew to what it is today. This 500 young people a year so far, 99% high school graduation and college acceptance rates, um, and happy kids. A lot of happy kids running around.
Yeah, that's amazing, man. I love to hear the success stories, but I also love to hear the fact that this was something that helped you as a young person and helped you kind of vent certain frustrations that you may have had, and now you are giving back to the community and allowing young people today to have that same experience. Because I think that there's such a misunderstanding about the new generation, particularly in Chicago is definitely a place where this misunderstanding kind of reaches a peak. There's such a misunderstanding about the new generation that they don't care about nothing. They're so much more violent than other generations that came before them. And whenever I hear that, I'm like, but a lot of that they learned from us, and a
Right.
lot of that is due to the conditions that were built for them by previous generations. So we keep blaming them and we keep saying, "Oh, it's them, it's them, it's them." But it's like, how much of that is us, and how much of that is a reflection of society that they were raised in? You know?
Well, the pattern of the older generation bashing the younger generation makes me wonder who they think raised them. And and the idea, I I can't say this online in circles because you can't really communicate against what people feel. But we're actually safer than we were 30 years ago. There's less violent crime than there was back in the day when they're talking about the heyday. There are fewer robberies, fewer property crimes. We are safer now than we. So if I think people look at the new generation, they attribute everything wrong that they see around them to that generation being wrong, and they can't get out of that loop. It's just it seems like a part of our thinking. But the reality is things are getting better. Things are getting better, and the fact that things are changing, I think, is what people are pushing back against when they talk about the new generation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was talking to this with my last guest about, we were talking about crime rates in America. You go back to the 80s, early 90s. I mean, they were insane, insane, all over the place in every major city. It's not even close to that today. So the
No,
narrative is so disrupted and just so distorted because it really isn't that bad. Things have gotten better, particularly in our communities. And
right.
I do think that, like you said before, the narrative that it hasn't gotten better, that it's getting worse, that it's just violent, it serves a certain purpose for certain individuals and it serves their power structure.
In the early '90s, Chicago was doing 1,000 deaths, 1,000 murders a year. you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And we will be up in arms if we're at 700. You know, to have a 30% decrease in murders in the city. You know, it's not where you want it to be. But if we're going to fault the newest generations for everything wrong that we see, at what point do we credit them? At what point do we
Exactly.
say, you know what, they're doing it better? And that's just not a part of our psyche.
Do you think that also maybe like the way the generation presents itself? Because I mean, I know, the whole drill scene pretty much started in Chicago. The music, the way sometimes this is presented on social media. And again, I always tell people like, hey, you go back to the 90s, you go back to the late 80s, there was gangster rap back then. We had all these things back then. So
Yeah.
again, who taught these individuals this stuff? They're just doing their version of something that we were doing 20, 30 years ago.
I am outraged by the music that I hear now and realize like, oh, I was doing that. Like I was doing that same stuff. Like many
Yeah.
men was death upon me. And that's like 12 years. That's like get rich and die trying.
Exactly, exactly. It's the same thing. It sounds different and it might sound a little bit more inflammatory to us. But yeah, I was thinking about that the other day because I was trying to listen to some new music and I was like, man, it's just so negative. And then I'm thinking, but 50 Cent's entire first CD was pretty negative, man. Like there was nothing super positive about that, you know.
Yeah,
And then you go back even further. You go back to NWA, like it's been pretty negative for a while, and that just seems to be an aspect of the entertainment. And I've even been telling people like, if you go back even further than that, like I
right.
mean, the whole idea of what a gangster is, that comes from Chicago, but it doesn't come from our community specifically. That comes from like the Italian American community, the
Yeah,
Irish American community, going all the way back to like the 1920s and everything like that. So this has been around for a really long time. It definitely wasn't something that these kids created. They're just doing it in their own way.
absolutely. And when you think about what those communities have in common, those are communities that were ostracized and cut out from the mainstream ideas of success. And you're just seeing it by the people who've been longest cut off from the mainstream ideas of success within our communities.
One time I believe we had an interaction online. This was about like 2 years because we've been following each other for a while now. This is about 2 years ago, and at the time I was actually working for a nonprofit, but it was actually a nonprofit media company in New York, and they had me doing all kinds of videos. And some of the videos I was doing, I was like not really big on. And I think I did a video about policing, and I
Mm,
remember you had a reaction where you were like, you know what, more police really isn't going to solve our problems. And
yeah,
it's actually a philosophy that I also hold. But when you tell people that, they're always like, but yeah, but there is so much crime here and there's so much crime there. So what does solve the problem? So
yeah,
first of all, I want you to tell me a little bit about your philosophy of why you think more police doesn't solve the problem. And then
yeah.
two, what in lieu of that, what should we be doing to try to get young people more motivated so that they don't reach for a gun and so they don't reach for some of these more violent acts?
Yeah, I mean, the idea of me saying that out loud, more police won't solve the problem, that is a scary thought to a lot of people because it is the only thing that we've been promised to deal with crime at all. So when people think of fewer police, they automatically think more crime, and that's not necessarily the occasion. Excuse me, the situation. I think it's important to note what our philosophy behind crime is. Our philosophy behind crime is that we will police in order to deter, and when a crime takes place, the police will then go and find those people and punish them, and other people will see that person get punished and decide not to do it while that person is incapacitated. It's a really reactive way to think about crime. And it hasn't been effective. If I don't know the murder clearance rates around the country, but in Chicago, they're somewhere around 50%. And many of those clearances are because the person who did the killing is already dead or presumed to be dead. So if the deterrent aspect of that is not very strong, particularly if the forces pushing somebody to do the crime are stronger than that deterrent aspect. We have to find ways to make the threshold that someone will be willing to commit a crime higher. That means improving the quality of life for people. There is very little that's gonna make me pick up a gun and go kill somebody. Right? There's very little because I have a really good life, and I'm not trying to give that up for anything. And I see I see a reason to help other people have a really good life. Uh, it, it, there's I'm stammering because I have so much to say. Uh, when we think about sending a person to prison for the crime that they've committed, I'm thinking about the Menendez brothers now.
Yeah.
I'm not sure where they are with their case, but they may be getting out pretty soon. And whether it's right or not, one of the ideas I think about is what has happened while they were in prison. that is going to support their successful reintegration into society. We send people to sit in a box and say, think about it for a while, and then come out and go to the same neighborhood and do better. How about we start improving those neighborhoods? How about we start giving people resources and opportunities? Because those on the if we solve these problems on the front end, there'll be a lot fewer problems on the back end, and we can figure out what to do with them then.
You really hit the nail on the head when you talk about the fact that one, it's all about resources, and it's all about when you said the fact that you have a really good life, so there's really nothing that can make you angry enough to go throw it away on something violent.
Right.
And I think that I think the same way. And when I was younger, I didn't really think like that. I think when you're younger, it's harder to understand consequences. That frontal lobe isn't fully developed yet. And so it's harder to understand, like, okay, if I do A, then B is gonna happen.
Right.
But obviously, if you give kids and the resources and
Right.
you let them say, okay, like, but if you do A over here, something good, then B, something even better is gonna happen, right? You give them that idea very young. I mean, there's a reason why kids in communities that do have resources, regardless of skin color, regardless of race, kids do have resources in certain communities. They don't commit violent acts because they have something to live for, right?
Right.
And so you have to give somebody something to live for. You have to improve the quality of their life, because otherwise, a lot of people who do, like you said, engage in these actions, they don't have anything to live for. They don't have anything to lose. And if you don't have
Right.
anything to lose, then there's not going to be any deterrent to what you're going to do, because to these people, prison is not a deterrent. That doesn't bother them at all.
I think you nailed that. The greatest deterrent is the good stuff you have in your life.
Exactly.
That's where the deterrent aspect comes in. When you look at the neighborhoods that are safest, you hear it all the time. The neighborhoods that are safest don't have the most police; they have the best resources.
Absolutely.
We have young people in our program who have been previously involved in the criminal justice system. In Chicago, the recidivism rate is 87%.
Wow.
87% of kids who get locked up for whatever reason or another get locked up again within the next few years. Not a single kid in the block has ever been arrested or rearrested while engaged in our program. They have good things going for them. We put good stuff in kids' lives. They start making good choices. You need to have good choices to make good choices.
Absolutely. Yeah, and like you said before, and it always comes back to this, if we disrupt that narrative, and like you said, I mean, your group is showing, if you give these children structure, you give them something to look forward to, give them a community to be a part of, then there's a much lesser chance, I mean, almost a zero chance that they're going
Mhm.
to go out and do something stupid. But also too, it's going to improve in their school. I mean, you talked about having a 99% graduation rate and acceptance to college rate. I mean, everything about what you're doing is improving the community. But like you said, it ruins the narrative for certain groups that need that community to suffer, so they
Mhm.
can use that for their power structure, where it comes to like funding for the police or funding for certain prisons and things like that. Like, they have to have the crime be sort of high in certain areas in order to support that power structure.
Yeah, because then they can extract value. They can buy the property
Exactly.
and wait for us to move out. They can do all sorts of things. They're going to extract the value, extract the money from that community, and keep us subservient.
That really seems to be the case. But like I said, people like you who are going out there and actually disrupting that, I have the utmost respect for that, because it is key to, because we have to solve it ourselves. And that's another thing I always tell people is, like, the government and everything like that. I'm all for more programs, state programs, and things like that. But ultimately, there's always going to be kind of a catch with a lot of that. So it really is something that has to come from the community itself, from community leaders like you, from nonprofits, from different organizations that are going to come in and do it because it needs to be done, not because of a political reason and things like that. And if we had more politicians that actually thought about, like, hey, doing this for the right reasons, not just for what they can get out of it, what they can financially gain out of it, then maybe that system would be better. But as of right now, it's certainly something that we have to do ourselves and do it from our own communities.
And until we start doing it from our own communities, it won't be reflected by the government. I think people are very much want a world that we haven't prepared for in our own communities just yet. When we
Yeah.
talk about moving a government to the left, and we talk about restorative systems, we need to create that in our communities. We have to start with that, and then let the government mirror it, as opposed to hoping the government starts it, because government has not been representative of the people since the beginning of our government.
Yeah.
And we need to create it on our own, and then force the government into it after that.
Talking about moving the government to the left, I don't want to get too political, because I don't really see a whole lot of. I mean, obviously, your content is a little political just because of the things you're talking about, but you don't really get into like overt
Mhm.
politics as much on your particular page. But one thing that I've been talking with other people about, I recently saw you at a forum. You were with
Yep.
Ernest Krim the third, and Conscious Lee,
Yep.
two of my favorite creators. You three guys. I remember when I saw that picture, I was like, "This is just my For You page. This is
Yeah.
just what I see 75, 80% of the time on my For You page. These three guys, they come up so often, and so it was really, really awesome seeing you guys connect."
Let me just say, like being on stage with those guys,
Mm.
they make you bring your A game.
Yes,
Like, you
yes,
cannot with your B or your C. I was after Ernest,
yeah.
and the question came out, and he just knocked it out of the park. I was like, "Yeah, I thought we were gonna warm up." I thought introductions. It's like let me get caught up to these guys. So and then consciously the way he could just shift he shifted the entire room with a couple of things that he said. Where it's like they have such a finger on the pulse of what's happening inside of people's hearts and know how to touch that in such a beautiful and profound way. It was a heck of an experience to be on stage with those guys.
You guys make so much incredible content about your community, about the Black community, about our experience in this country, and it's so forward thinking, it's so educated. And then I think about the fact that, this past election, we did see a sort of regression in our community. A lot of Black people, particularly Black men, were a lot more susceptible to the right and its messaging. And so, why do you think that is? Because this is something that I've been asking a lot of people who are community organizers and people who, particularly who have sort of the mentality that you guys have. Why
Yeah.
do you think it is that we've seen more people in our community gravitating towards the right, and what is it about the left that may be ostracizing some of these people at the
I
present
think
moment?
that there are a couple of things going on. One is the closer you are to being able to transcend, the more likely you are to vote on the right. For a black man, a black woman is never going to be able to transcend. A black man is closer to being able to transcend, so they can say, "Hey, I feel like this might be better for me and my family, so I'm going to go and do this thing." It's a lot easier to think on an individualistic level when it comes to politics if the threat isn't as strong towards you. And I think that's why we see black women on what I would consider to be the right side of history on so many fronts, because they understand the many ways that folks can be harmed by certain politics. And that understanding isn't going to be as strong in men, because it is not on our doorstep all the
Yeah,
time. And I think that's something that one uh, there needs to be stronger communication. Also, the left has to be intentional about appealing and saying like what is going to be in this for Black people. Even as does Donald Trump say a lot of true things about his expectations for what he'll do for Black people? I don't think so. But even in his what I consider offensive and erratic speeches in those realms, yeah, a positive vision for Black people. It gets caught in my throat even saying this out loud. But he wants to present a positive vision for Black people in ways that some Black men are willing to believe. So I think the pitch that came from the left was basically like, "What are you doing? Why aren't you voting?" And the pitch that came from the right was, "Oh, life is going to be beautiful for you." When I think about Barack Obama going and talking to high school teenagers, like, "What's wrong with y'all? Why is that how we're talking to Black men about voting? When again, 80% of us are going to vote on the left. Why is it that we are shouting at us as opposed to like hearing our issues and clearly explaining how you're going to respond to them?" I think the outreach to Black men has been lacking because of the expectation of our vote as opposed to the courting of our vote, and that's something that has to change on the left.
absolutely. I couldn't agree more with all of that. Particularly, two things. Particularly, what you said. It reminds me. Dara Star Tucker is another content creator who I'm a big fan of. And as a Black woman, she said, "As a Black woman, I don't get the luxury of just ignoring, all that comes with that to support something that I know will go in the face of everything that all my rights essentially." And when you think about women, a lot of their rights are being threatened by the right, just the reproductive rights. And then as a Black woman, you are particularly more vulnerable to that. So they don't have the luxury to kind of toss that aside and say, okay, yeah, maybe I'll support this when there's so many threats coming from that to their particular demographic.
Yeah.
But like you said, it really does come down to messaging, and that's something that I talked a lot about on my page when it came to this election. It really does come down to messaging. A lot, I remember hearing like campaign commercials from Harris and just that particular area, and it was just kind of like some, it was like voting is how we change things. You got to go out there and vote, and it was just like, yeah, but what exactly are you changing? Like, what are the specifics? Like, there was no real specifics. There was just kind of like you have to vote, or otherwise things are going to be terrible. But they weren't actually giving them something to vote for. They weren't actually giving them any real roadmap or any specifics. It was just like you got to vote for this, right? Whereas the right, I mean, even though I personally disagree with a lot of the things they were offering actual things. They were offering concrete, actual things. Whether it's a lot of it was inflammatory towards some immigrants and inflammatory towards certain institutions, but it was an actual concrete like here's what we will give you, and
Right.
that's at least in that particular instance, what you're getting. And I think with the left, it was kind of ambiguous. We didn't really know what we were getting, other than maybe a firewall to what the right was trying to do.
And that point there, on one end, we spent more time courting Dick Cheney than black men. That's one problem. But yeah, there has to be I think about like why we're freaking out right now, and why it doesn't feel like our ancestors were freaking out as much. Like I can't imagine Bayard Rustin looking at the individual appointments of Strom Thurmond and having as much outrage because he knows Strom Thurmond is bad, right? But he has a positive vision of the future that he's going to continue to pursue. And until we have a positive vision of the future to say, this is what we're trying to accomplish, this is where we're going right now, we can't feel secure and stable and know what our next step is. So the outrage and the protection is what's going to drive us. But the I don't want to vote for A to stop B, right? I
Yeah,
did,
yeah.
right? But I don't want to vote for A to stop B. I want to vote for A to do these wonderful things, and they've got to tell us what those wonderful things are very clearly, so that we can get behind it.
Switching gears just a little bit here, some of the content that you've been doing a lot lately on social media really pertains to parenting and child rearing of children that are a little bit younger than the groups that you work with your nonprofit. You have a
Yes,
toddler
indeed.
child,
I got a
and
year old. My 1 year old is walking now, so I got two toddlers.
oh, oh my goodness, you have
Yeah,
two toddlers. Oh, that's a different story, a different ball game altogether. So I'm just so interested in some of your videos because one of the main videos that I see from you, and you get a lot of backlash on these videos, is where you talk about corporal punishment
yeah,
and you talk about how hitting your kids really doesn't work. Like it does not give you the results that you really want. And if it does even give you some of those results, it's certainly not giving you those results for the right reasons.
right.
So kind of go into your philosophy regarding that. Why is it that, and I know people from our community were really raised a lot on corporal punishment.
Yeah,
And you get these older people who say things like, well, that's the reason why these kids are so bad today, because they stopped whooping them and they stopped hitting them. And it's like, I don't think that's it. So give me some of your philosophy on why that just doesn't really work.
I mean, people. A few things people don't realize about me when they come at me on social media about this is when I was whooped as a kid, right? And I think about and I had a wonderful mother. She did what she knew, right?
Yeah.
But it's one of the biggest compliments I can give to my mother is to grow from some of the things that she did that didn't serve me. I love my mother to death. She loves me to heaven and hell if she has to, and we have a wonderful relationship. That doesn't mean that everything that she did was right, and she knows that not everything. She was a young mother doing what she knew, doing what she came up with. What a whooping did for me was made me good at hiding. What a whooping did for me was say, like, you know what, I'm not going to ask for that thing. And then as an adult, I had to teach myself how to say what I need. As an adult, I had to teach myself how to own up to my mistakes. Then I move into the classroom, and I'm still believing in corporal punishment at this time. I know some kids get whooped and they come back, and I realize a few things. One, they're mad at me about that. Two, they're starting to lie and deceive so that they don't get in trouble. Three, they can't ever look their problems in the eye. They have to hide from them, and we just end up with more issues going down the line. And I met this woman named Barbara Norris who told me that she would never put her hands on her kid, and neither would her husband. She said, "If you love your kids enough and you live a life that they can look up to, they will run through a brick wall for you." And that was the first person I had ever met said that she wasn't going to hit her kids. She got little black babies, and they're not getting hit. And I started meeting more parents who were saying this, and they were parents of some of my students. Like, how do you like? What is your secret with JoJo? Oh, we just love them. We know they're going to make mistakes. When they make mistakes, we talk about it. And I started realizing the kids who are willing to be held accountable, the kids who are making mistakes and coming back from them positively, who aren't angry at me when they get caught with stuff, those kids are being raised in a completely different way than these other
Yeah.
kids. As a coach, I would use punishment, and then one day I walk into training, as opposed to like punishing and shouting, I just started complimenting kids. Like started catching them doing good, and I watched the quality of our training go up. So I have all these data points
Mhm.
that have come together to say maybe we don't have to be as punitive as we thought we could. Maybe we can motivate young people in a different way. And you put that together with all the research that says kids who get hit are more likely to be aggressive, lower confidence, lower cognitive skills. All these pieces that are telling us it's wrong. To me, the only reason we keep it is because it's what we've always done. So for me, I feel very passionately about like letting people know that there's a different way. I know I get a lot of backlash because I'm touching on something that is deeply held for a lot of people, but there are a
Yeah.
lot of people who are about to have kids, who had kids, who thinking about whooping them, or have whooped their kids, or coming to me in private and saying, you know what, I thought I was going to whoop my kids, but now I'm going to look for other ways because we can
Yeah.
find other ways.
Yeah, it is good that you're changing people's minds, but yeah, of course you're gonna get some backlash. That I saw your most recent video where you were talking about that philosophy of like all the problems that hitting your children cause, and then you were like, you told the phone, now read that back to me, and then it was all just like the way people actually hear it is like let the kid be in control and just do like like never punish your kids at all, and it's like and that's what people are hearing, but they're not really hearing your full message, which is you have to be able to discipline your children, but there are better ways to go about it than corporal punishment.
Mhm.
Because, like you said, first of all, I've always felt it odd that people will justify hitting their children, but like you would never justify hitting your wife, right? You would never justify hitting your spouse, and it's like because you would say, well, that's not real love. You can't hit something just because you love it, like right? That's what we would say, which is correct. So why would you justify doing that to someone even smaller who has
Right.
less understanding about the situation and what they did wrong?
Mhm.
It's just and I think a lot of it comes from just parental frustration. Like they don't know what else to do. They get so frustrated with a situation and they allow their anger and their emotions to take over the situation. And it like I said, almost always ends badly. Like there's really no benefits to it.
Yeah, there is a skills gap that needs to be addressed, and but I'm going to push back and say there were to say that we would never justify hitting a spouse is
Mm-hmm.
actually there was a time where that was completely normal and prescribed even for a spousal relationship. People with disabilities, it was normal and prescribed for people with disabilities to punish them physically. And the more we've come to recognize the full humanity of people, the further we've gotten away from that practice. And I think recognizing the full humanity of children, that they are people with rights, they are
Yes.
people with their own thought processes and personalities and wishes and will, and we need to honor their rights. That is the next frontier of civil rights. I think. I know we got a
Yes.
lot of frontiers to be on, but children are a major frontier of that.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And also, I was thinking about what you said about when a child gets corporal punishment, it doesn't make them actually want to do right. It just makes them hide the bad that they are doing. And that
Hmm.
and that kind of reminds me, like I was a problem child, particularly when I was in like sixth, seventh grade, had a lot of just behavioral problems. And I remember that was during a time period I was, living in the South. I was living in Alabama. That was during a time period where they still paddled kids, right?
Yeah,
That's something that you don't hear about as much anymore, but they still paddle kids. And I remember getting a paddling, and it just made me like angry and want to do more bad things, but want to get better at hiding them and things like that. And it didn't improve me. Like I just got worse and worse and worse. And then when I went to high school, I went to a school that didn't do that, that didn't give out corporal punishment. And a lot of their punishments were more based on like, okay, let's talk about what you did. Write a. I remember one time they made me write a letter about what I did. And then writing that letter, I'm sitting there like kind of thinking about what I did and like, wait a minute,
I
that
kind of
was
messed
kind of
up.
messed up. That was kind of messed up. That was kind of messed up. And so doing that made me understand the consequences of my behavior a lot more than someone just hitting me and then sending me back to a classroom angry,
Yeah.
upset, embarrassed, and taking all those emotions and that baggage back with me and just basically going to continue to use it and display that towards the rest of the class instead of actually learning from my mistakes.
Yeah, I mean, people really believe that they deserved it. People really believe that they were bad kids when in reality they were just kids, right? They
Yeah.
were kids doing kid stuff, and kids just aren't good at stuff. Sometimes, like, aren't good, good at managing emotions and making decisions on the fly. Like they get caught up in the moment. Everything is forever, and they mess up. And if we can look at it through that lens, as opposed to labeling them as bad children, I think that changes the way that we get to react on it. I love that idea, that realization about the reflection, because we think of like hitting as discipline, but it's not.
Yeah.
It's not accountability. It's not discipline. It's just retribution.
Yeah.
But restoration to me is the highest form of accountability. If we can get a young person to reflect and then go and do something to fix the problem that they've caused, they're less likely to take that action in the future. They have an understanding. They build their empathy as opposed to shutting themselves down and just trying not to get caught in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And something else that you said earlier, when you said you were as a coach, instead of going in and yelling and doing things like that, you actually started complimenting the children, and you saw an improvement there. I mean, that's something that even starts at a really young age, because I'll notice, like with my toddler, for instance, whenever he does something like he counts to 10, or he does his ABCs, and I'll like say good job, congratulations, and stuff like that, he gets so happy. He's like,
Right.
wow, I did something right. I did something correct. And he just gets so happy. And it just encourages him to keep pushing, to keep doing it even more. But if I'm in a bad mood and I tell him, like, stop that, get down from that couch, and I start like yelling, he just
Yeah.
gets really upset. And then he gets upset with me for raising my voice. And it
Right.
doesn't have the same effect. So it's like but I think it's so difficult when your child is doing something you don't want them to do. It's so difficult to just, how do you like how do you go about just like explaining, like, you don't, please don't do that. But then if you're doing it kind of in a soft way, they're not taking it serious. If you go too far and start yelling, then they're getting upset and no one's learning anything. How do you strike that balance, especially with a child that young, on like just how to get them to not do the stuff that they're doing that you don't want them to do?
Yeah, I don't explain anything in a moment. It's like, yeah, like you talking to a squirrel, right? And I mean that lovingly, right? But they're just not in the when if my son is acting up, he's not in a place for me to describe anything to him, right? Man, we had a tough morning this morning. He just didn't want to get dressed, and I was like, okay, I'm getting you dressed. This is just like, I know I can talk to you about it forever, but I'm gonna be, yeah, you don't want to put your socks on, I'm putting your socks on. So whatever the behavior is, I just go stop it, and then when he's more in a headspace where he can think and understand, that's when we can have a conversation about it. We can make a plan about it in a few, like, you know he wanted to take some time to play this morning, but he had taking 20 minutes to get some pants on, right? It's like, I'm not telling him that while we're calm, while he's angry, but like once we're done, it's like, hey man, tomorrow morning, this is how we gotta get up if you want to play these games. And then he might do the same thing again tomorrow. He'll figure it out over time.
Yeah.
But it doesn't take harshness for me. I can be I have to remind myself he's not giving me a hard time. He's having a hard time.
Yeah.
And then move as if he's having a hard time, and then support them later and with some explanations.
Yeah, I honestly think that's a really good tip. That's something I'm still learning. The idea of, you really can't explain it to them in the moment because the emotions are too high on both sides for
Yeah.
that rational conversation to take place. And that actually, it really is similar to my own situation, because like when my son is after the point of being upset about something, and he's actually sitting down, and then I start talking to him. That's when he's actually listening. That's when
Yep.
he's asking questions. That's when he's actually like, yeah, okay, I understand this. And if he doesn't understand, he'll say, I don't understand that. And it's like, you have that conversation. But if you're in that moment, he's jumping on the couch and you're telling him to get down, you can't tell him, get down because this is an expensive couch and I just bought it. Like, you can't explain it because they don't care, first of all. And second of all, that's not going to achieve the objective of actually getting to get off the couch. And that's
Yeah.
something I'm still having to teach myself. I think that's a really, really good parenting tip, to just, get the action done in the moment, and then later, when everyone is calmer, explain why certain things had to be done a certain way.
Yeah, and if you can redirect it to something else, and that's always best. And listen, I'm saying this like I'm not gonna go struggle this afternoon. Like it's just what it is. They just test you. It's just,
Yeah.
but we have to respond in a way that builds their understanding, that affirms their worth, as opposed to responding in a way to get the immediate action, regardless of how it impacts them in the long run. I think just that consciousness of it, and we're gonna mess up. Right.
Yeah.
We're not going to be perfect with it. We're going to do things that just don't make any sense because we don't know what we're doing either. But as long as we're conscious of the impact that we're having, and we understand what our limits are, I think that's just important. that's important as parents.
So tell me more about how people out there watching this can support the block and support the mission that you have to really improve the at-risk youth in your community.
I want to point out one thing. I avoid saying those words at risk because of the bar that it sets for young people that we work with.
Yes,
You
understandable.
know, we work with some talented young people, and if the moment we say they're at risk, as long as we're keeping them off the streets, we're good. So in
Yeah,
terms of
yeah,
continually challenging that narrative, like I remember I was talking to a funder, and I'm just describing kids like, man, we got this kid, he's about to be a straight A student. We work with the most wonderful young people in the world, and they were, well, why do they need our support? Well, don't all kids need your support? You know, don't all kids deserve these things?
yeah.
I for us, we're working to expand out into schools across the west side of Chicago. Right now, schools have no money for after school programming. We talked to a school who has $15,000 for all the after school programs for the year, and that is an injustice, really. We want to we want to install programs in the schools so young people can reach these life changing benefits of our program. You know, donations at theblockchicago.org would be wonderful. Following us at the Block Chicago on Instagram, Facebook to help you keep in touch. Talk about us. Follow me on Instagram. I'm Jamyle Cannon, and any type of support that you can give is wonderful because we want to change the after school landscape of Chicago's West Side. We want to change what it feels like to be outside at 3:30 on the west side of Chicago, and that is within our reach.
Absolutely, and I appreciate the clarification there because I do think that sometimes, language is really important, and how we describe these children, how we describe these communities is really important. And if we reinforce a lot of the negative stereotypes that really even aren't that accurate about the situation, then it makes it more difficult to change the situation. So I definitely appreciate that, and I mean I appreciate you coming on the show. This was a great conversation, and I want to end by just asking you, what are some of the things that other people out there who are trying to improve their communities, who are trying to find ways to improve, things for their children, or if they are a teacher or a coach and they're, maybe they are struggling with some of their students. What are some of just the last minute kind of, I mean, I know this is kind of a lofty question, but what are some of the last minute tips that you can kind of give them on where to start? Like, how do you start on that path of being able to really give these children something to look forward to, something to live for that can really change the mentality?
I think the first thing is to really connect with what it is that you have to give as an individual, right? What are your passions? What is your individual gift that you get to give and to bring value to young people? And I think if I take that idea, how do I bring value to this young person's life, or how do I bring value to my community? What are the gifts that I have? I can use I can use that with my children. How do I bring value to you in this moment when you're struggling? I can use that with my nonprofit. What is a gift that I have to offer? I can use that in my community. What can I do for my neighbor right now that is going to enrich and bring value to their lives? I think really centering in on the gift that you have to give and give it as freely as possible.
I appreciate it so much. This was such an engaging conversation. Thank you so much for your time. Jamel, it's been a pleasure, man.
Hey, this is great. What a wonderful time. Thank you.